Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the old mare lunged forward with bared teeth, her skeletal body positioned between any human approach and whatever precious secret lay trembling beneath her. The miracle this broken, defensive animal guarded so fiercely would either save the failing rescue ranch or become the center of a battle that could destroy everything Sarah had left. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Ranch as Sarah Walker made her rounds, checking on the horses before the day's work began in earnest. At 32, Sarah had taken over the struggling rescue ranch from her late father just 18 months ago, and every day was a battle to keep it afloat. The ranch housed over 20 rescued horses, each with their own story of neglect or abuse, each requiring care that stretched Sarah's limited resources to the breaking point. "Morning, beauties," she called out, her voice carrying across the paddocks where most of the horses had already gathered for breakfast. All except one. Sarah frowned, scanning the property until her eyes settled on the old barn at the far end of the ranch. That's where Duchess would be, keeping to herself as always. Duchess was different from the other rescues. The old Palomino mare with a flowing cream-colored mane had arrived at Willow Creek 6 months ago after being seized from a neglectful owner. Unlike the other horses who gradually warmed to human interaction, Duchess remained distant, suspicious of every hand that reached for her. Sarah had made some progress, but the mare still kept everyone at a safe distance, her deep brown eyes always watching, always wary. With a sigh, Sarah grabbed a bucket of feed and made her way to the old barn. The weathered structure had been her father's pride when he first established the ranch 15 years ago. Now, like everything else on the property, it was showing signs of age and disrepair. "Duchess," she called softly as she approached the half-open barn door. "Got your breakfast, girl?" There was no answering nicker, no sound of hooves shifting in anticipation. Strange. Duchess might be standoffish, but she never missed a meal. A knot of concern tightened in Sarah's stomach as she pushed the door open wider, wincing at the creak of rusty hinges. The barn's interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the few beams of sunlight that managed to penetrate the weathered walls. Sarah's eyes took a moment to adjust before she spotted Duchess in the furthest stall. The mare was lying down on her side in the fresh straw, an unusual position for a horse that typically remained vigilant and ready to flee. "Duchess, are you okay, girl?" Sarah quickened her pace, worry building in her chest. Horses rarely lay down for extended periods, unless something was wrong. Very wrong. As Sarah approached, Duchess's head shot up, ears pinned back in warning. The mare's eyes, usually distant and wary, now blazed with a fierce protective intensity that stopped Sarah in her tracks. A low, threatening rumble emanated from Duchess's throat, a sound Sarah had never heard the mare make before. "Easy, girl," Sarah murmured, setting the feed bucket down and raising her hands in a placating gesture. "I just want to check on you." She took another step forward, and Duchess reacted with startling aggression, lunging up to a half-standing position while keeping her body curled protectively around something Sarah couldn't quite see. The message was clear: come no closer. "What's going on here?" The deep voice behind Sarah made her jump. She turned to find Mike Donnelly, the local veterinarian and her father's oldest friend, standing in the barn doorway. In his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes set in a weathered face, Mike had been helping out at the ranch whenever he could since Sarah's father passed. "It's Duchess," Sarah explained, gesturing toward the agitated mare. "She's acting strange. Lying down won't let me near her. I'm worried she might be colicking." Mike approached slowly, his experienced gaze taking in the scene. "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know. She wasn't with the others this morning, and when I found her here..." Sarah's voice trailed off as Duchess snorted and shifted, momentarily revealing what looked like a small, wet bundle partially hidden beneath her body. Mike's eyes widened. "Sarah, I think she's had a foal." "What?" Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. Duchess wasn't pregnant when she arrived. We checked all the rescues." Yet even as she said it, Sarah knew it could be true. Duchess had been noticeably rounder than the other horses, but everyone had attributed it to her finally putting on healthy weight after years of neglect. The mare had been severely malnourished when animal control found her tethered in a barren lot with minimal shelter, food, or water. "Horses can be tricky," Mike said, shaking his head. "Some mares barely show, especially older ones who've had foals before. Their muscles remember." Sarah's mind raced back to Duchess's arrival. The mare had been rescued during a raid on a property where dozens of animals were found in deplorable conditions. The owner, a once respected horse breeder fallen on hard times and into addiction, had allowed his once prize-winning animals to deteriorate to skeletal states. Could Duchess have been pregnant all this time, carrying new life amid such neglect? "We need to see that foal," Mike said urgently. "If it was just born, they both need checking. First births can be dicey and at Duchess's age." But when they tried to approach again, Duchess became even more agitated, scrambling to her feet with surprising agility for her age and condition. She positioned herself squarely between them and what was now clearly a newborn foal, trembling and wet in the straw. "She won't let us near," Sarah said, frustration edging her voice. "What if something's wrong with the baby? What if it needs help?" Mike studied the mare thoughtfully. "She's protecting it. Must be her maternal instincts kicking in strong, especially after whatever trauma she's been through." He paused, considering. "You've made the most progress with her, Sarah. If anyone has a chance of getting close, it's you." Sarah bit her lip, watching as Duchess stood trembling before her foal, nostrils flared and eyes wild with fear and determination. Despite her weakened state, the mare was prepared to fight to protect her baby. "Let me try something," Sarah said finally. She slowly backed away, retrieving the feed bucket she'd brought. Then, keeping her movements deliberate and calm, she sat down on a hay bale several yards from Duchess and began to hum softly, the same melody she'd used during their grooming sessions when the mare would finally allow Sarah to brush her mane. Minutes stretched into a half hour as Sarah continued her gentle humming, occasionally speaking in soothing tones to the nervous mare. "It's okay, Duchess. No one's going to hurt your baby. You're safe here. You're both safe." Gradually, imperceptibly, Duchess's rigid posture began to relax. Her ears, previously pinned back in aggression, slowly rotated forward. The wild look in her eyes softened, though she remained positioned protectively near her foal. Mike watched in silent amazement as Sarah's patience began to pay off. After nearly an hour, Duchess finally lowered her head slightly, not a surrender but perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement that these humans might not pose an immediate threat. "That's a good girl," Sarah murmured, hardly daring to breathe too loudly. "Such a good mama protecting your baby. We just want to help, that's all." The old mare's eyes, so full of distrust for so long, now seemed to hold a question. Could these humans truly be trusted with her most precious creation? The foal behind her shifted in the straw, letting out a tiny, perfect whinny that echoed through the silent barn like a miracle-given voice. That tiny sound seemed to shift something in the atmosphere of the dusty barn. Sarah remained perfectly still, barely breathing, as Duchess took a hesitant step forward. The mare's eyes never left Sarah's face, searching for any sign of threat or deception. Finding none, she lowered her head slightly and nudged the feed bucket with her nose. "She's giving you permission," Mike whispered from his position by the door. "Move slowly." Sarah nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. With deliberate, measured movements, she rose from the hay bale and took a single step toward Duchess and her hidden foal. When the mare didn't retreat, Sarah took another step, and then another, murmuring gentle reassurances all the while. "That's it, girl. You're so brave. Such a good mama." Finally, Sarah was close enough to reach out and touch Duchess's neck. The mare trembled beneath her fingers but held her ground. Gradually, Duchess shifted her position, allowing Sarah her first clear view of the miracle she'd been protecting. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The foal was small, too small, but perfectly formed, with spindly legs tucked beneath a damp golden coat that promised to match its mother's palomino beauty. Its large, dark eyes regarded Sarah with innocent curiosity, rather than its mother's hard-earned suspicion. "Oh, Duchess," Sarah whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "She's beautiful." Mike had quietly approached while Sarah gained the mare's trust. Now he stood beside her, his experienced gaze assessing the newborn. "It's a filly," he confirmed. "Small, but she looks healthy at first glance. Duchess cleaned her well. That's a good sign." The foal tried to rise on wobbly legs, tumbling back into the straw with an indignant snort that made Sarah laugh despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. Duchess immediately leaned down to nuzzle her baby, encouraging another attempt. "She needs a thorough checkup," Mike said, "and so does Duchess. The birth seems to have gone well, but we need to make sure there are no complications, especially given the mare's age and condition." Sarah nodded, reluctant to break the magical moment, but knowing Mike was right. "Can we do it here? I don't want to move them and stress Duchess out more." "Good thinking." Mike returned to the doorway where he'd left his medical bag. "I'll be gentle and quick. Last thing we need is for Duchess to decide I'm a threat and take my head off." As Mike prepared for the examination, Sarah continued to bond with the pair. She'd never witnessed anything quite like this. The fierce protectiveness of Duchess juxtaposed with the innocent vulnerability of her foal. It was a reminder of why she had fought so hard to keep her father's rescue running, despite mounting debts and endless challenges. "You were carrying this precious girl all along," Sarah murmured to Duchess, carefully stroking the mare's neck. "Through everything they put you through, you kept her safe." Mike returned with his bag and crouched a respectful distance away. "Talk to Duchess while I work. Keep her calm. I'll be as quick and gentle as possible." Sarah positioned herself near Duchess's head, maintaining eye contact and a soothing stream of conversation, while Mike carefully examined the foal, who accepted his touch with the curious indifference of the very young. The examination of Duchess proved more challenging, but the mare seemed to understand that the humans were trying to help, tolerating Mike's gentle probing with nervous stomps and flattened ears, but no real aggression. "Well," Mike said finally, packing away his stethoscope, "they're both doing remarkably well considering. The foal is small but healthy. Lungs sound clear, heart strong. I'd estimate she's just a few hours old, born sometime during the night." "And Duchess?" Sarah asked, still stroking the mare's neck. "She's passed the afterbirth cleanly, which is good news. She's underweight for a nursing mother, though. We'll need to adjust her feed, add supplements." Mike's expression grew serious. "Sarah, that foal is a miracle in more ways than one. Given Duchess's condition when she arrived, the stress of the rescue, the change in environment, by all rights, she should have lost that pregnancy." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of Mike's words. Most rescued horses arrived in various states of neglect or abuse, their bodies taxed to the limit. For Duchess to have carried a foal to term through such trauma was indeed miraculous. "She must have been in the early months when she was rescued," Mike continued, doing mental calculations. "Probably why it wasn't obvious. She's a survivor, this one." "Like mother, like daughter," Sarah said softly, watching the foal nuzzle against Duchess's leg, seeking milk. The mare gently nudged her baby toward her udder, displaying the innate maternal instincts that had enabled generations of horses to survive. As the foal found what she was seeking and began to nurse, Sarah's mind turned to the practical challenges ahead. The rescue was already operating on a shoestring budget, with feed costs rising and donations dwindling in the tough economy. Another mouth to feed, especially one requiring special care, would stretch their resources even thinner. "You're thinking about the money," Mike said, reading her expression with the ease of a lifelong friend. Sarah sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knew your father would have the exact same worry crease between his eyebrows." Mike smiled fondly. Jack never could hide his concerns either. "I was supposed to pay the feed supplier yesterday," Sarah admitted. "Asked for another extension, and the farrier is coming next week. I don't know how I'll cover it. Now with the foal needing special feed supplements." "One day at a time, Sarah," Mike said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "That's how your dad did it, and that's how you'll do it too. Besides," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "a newborn foal might be just the thing to spark some new interest in the rescue. People love baby animals." Sarah considered this. Mike had a point. Perhaps the foal could help bring in some much-needed donations and attention to Willow Creek's mission. She'd need to take some photos, update the rescue's modest website, maybe reach out to the local paper. "She needs a name," Sarah said suddenly, watching the foal's tail swish contentedly as she nursed. Mike chuckled. "That's your department. Something fitting for a miracle baby." Sarah studied the golden foal, her delicate features, the white star just beginning to show as her coat dried. A miracle indeed, born to an unwanted mare who had somehow found the strength to nurture new life despite everything, a spark of hope in the midst of neglect and despair. "Hope," Sarah said finally. "Her name is Hope." As if recognizing her new name, the foal detached from nursing and turned to look at Sarah with liquid brown eyes that seemed far too wise for her few hours of life. Duchess, too, raised her head, regarding Sarah with what might have been approval. In that moment, standing in the dusty barn with morning light streaming through the cracks in the weathered walls, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a renewal of her own hope that had been steadily eroding under the weight of financial worry and exhaustion. This unlikely pair, the battle-scarred mare and her perfect, impossible foal, had just given her a precious gift. "Welcome to the world, Hope," she whispered, "and welcome home." By mid-morning, news of Hope's miraculous birth had spread throughout Willow Creek Ranch. The 3 volunteers who helped Sarah run the place arrived for their shifts and immediately gravitated to the old barn, their faces lighting up at the sight of the wobbly-legged foal attempting to navigate the straw-covered floor under her mother's watchful eye. "She's absolutely perfect," breathed Lily Chen, a college student studying veterinary medicine who volunteered on weekends. "Look at those legs. She's going to be tall like her mama." "Can't believe Duchess kept this secret from us," added Tom Fletcher, a retired high school teacher who'd been volunteering since Sarah's father started the rescue. "Sneaky old girl." The third volunteer, 16-year-old Zach Miller, was already snapping photos with his phone. "These are definitely going on Instagram. People are going to lose their minds." Sarah smiled, watching as Hope investigated her new admirers from the safety of her mother's side. The little filly was gaining confidence by the hour, her curiosity beginning to overcome her initial timidity. Duchess, however, remained vigilant, allowing the familiar volunteers to approach but making it clear with subtle shifts in posture that any sudden movements would not be tolerated. "Zach, make sure you get some good ones for the website too," Sarah said. "And maybe the local paper would be interested in a story. A miracle foal born at a struggling rescue ranch." "Struggling is right," Tom muttered, pulling Sarah aside while the younger volunteers continued to coo over the foal. "Sarah, Jimson from the feed store called my cell this morning. Said he's been trying to reach you." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Did he say what he wanted?" Tom's weathered face creased with concern. "He can't extend any more credit, Sarah. Says his boss is breathing down his neck about outstanding accounts. He needs at least a partial payment by Monday, or he can't deliver next week's order. The momentary lightness Sarah had felt watching Hope evaporated. Monday was 3 days away, and the rescue's bank account held barely enough to cover the electricity bill. Without feed deliveries, they'd have nothing for the horses by Wednesday. "I'll figure something out," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We've been in tight spots before." Tom nodded, though his eyes reflected the same worry Sarah was trying to hide. They both knew this was different. Jack Walker had maintained a network of loyal donors and supporters built over decades in the community. Since his death, many had drifted away, finding other causes to support or simply losing the personal connection that had kept them giving. "Maybe Hope can help," Sarah added, glancing back at the foal who was now attempting to chew on Zach's hoodie strings while the teenager laughed. "People love a good story, right? A pregnant rescue horse defying the odds to deliver a healthy foal." "Worth a shot," Tom agreed. "Need help with anything else before I start the morning feeds?" Sarah assigned tasks to the volunteers: stalls to muck, water troughs to fill, medications to administer to some of the special needs rescues, while she retreated to the small office attached to the main house to update the rescue's website and social media. The tiny room was cluttered with her father's old filing cabinets and faded photographs of horses they'd successfully rehabilitated and rehomed over the years. Pulling up the website on the ancient desktop computer, Sarah began typing. She described Duchess's rescue, her quiet strength and resilience, and the unexpected miracle of Hope's birth. She uploaded the photos Zach had sent to her phone, including one particularly heart-melting shot of Hope nuzzling her mother's cheek. "Please consider donating to help us provide specialized care for Duchess and her miracle foal," she wrote at the bottom, adding a link to their donation page. She posted similar updates to their Facebook and Instagram accounts, tagging local news outlets in hopes of catching their attention. After sending a direct email to the editor of the Eagle Creek Gazette, Sarah leaned back in her father's worn leather chair and rubbed her eyes. The morning's excitement had temporarily masked her exhaustion from weeks of working dawn to dusk with minimal help. The weight of responsibility for 23 horses, 3 volunteers, the legacy her father had built, pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Her gaze drifted to a framed photo on the desk, her father standing beside a beautiful bay thoroughbred, both looking proud and strong in the summer sunshine. Jack Walker had founded Willow Creek with his modest inheritance and boundless determination after a career as a high school agriculture teacher. He dedicated his retirement years to rescuing abused and neglected horses, giving them a second chance at life. "I'm trying, Dad," she whispered to the photo. "I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying." The sound of tires on gravel pulled Sarah from her thoughts. Visitors were rare at Willow Creek, especially on weekday mornings. Curious, she rose and walked to the office window, which offered a view of the main driveway. A sleek black Range Rover had pulled up beside her battered pickup truck, looking absurdly out of place on the modest rescue property. Sarah didn't recognize the vehicle, and apprehension crawled up her spine as she watched a tall man in expensive-looking riding boots and a tailored jacket step out and survey the place with an air of evaluation. Sarah hurried outside, intercepting the stranger before he could wander toward the barns. Up close, she could see he was perhaps in his early 40s with the kind of polished good looks that spoke of privilege and careful maintenance. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her tone friendly despite her instinctive wariness. The man turned, regarding her with cool gray eyes. "I hope so. I'm looking for Sarah Walker." "That's me." His eyebrows rose slightly, as if he'd expected someone else. "I'm Alexander Blackwood," he said, extending a manicured hand. "I understand you've recently had a new arrival at your establishment." Sarah shook his hand briefly, noting his firm grip. We take in new rescues fairly regularly, Mr. Blackwood. Are you interested in adopting? A smile flickered across his face, not quite reaching his eyes. Not exactly. I received a rather interesting call this morning from an acquaintance at the Eagle Creek Gazette. Apparently, one of my former horses has given birth here. A Palomino mare, I believe. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. Your former horse? Indeed. Alexander's smile widened, showing perfect teeth. You've been calling her Duchess, I understand? Her registered name is actually Golden Empress. She was one of my best broodmares before she was stolen from my property last year. Sarah stared at him, struggling to process his words. Stolen? Duchess, I mean your mare, was rescued by animal control from a property outside Eagle Creek. The owner was arrested for animal neglect. There were dozens of animals in terrible condition. Alexander's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Yes, an unfortunate situation. The man who was arrested used to work for me as a stable hand. He apparently took several of my horses when he was terminated, including Golden Empress. I've been searching for her for months. Sarah's mind raced. Could this be true? The rescue had received Duchess with proper documentation from animal control. There had been no mention of the mare being stolen property. I've come to reclaim what's mine, Alexander continued smoothly. Both the mare and her foal. I have all the necessary paperwork, of course. Registration documents, veterinary records, proof of ownership. I'm prepared to make a generous donation to your rescue in appreciation for the care you've provided. Sarah found her voice. Mr. Blackwood, I can't just hand over Duchess, Golden Empress, without verifying your claims. We have procedures for this kind of situation. Of course, he replied, his tone suggesting he found such procedures tedious, but was willing to indulge them. Take all the time you need to verify. I'll leave my contact information, but I should warn you that foal is extremely valuable. Empress was in foal to my champion stallion, Royal Decree, when she was taken. That little filly represents a significant investment, and I will pursue all legal avenues to reclaim my property. Sarah felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Could Duchess and Hope be taken away just as they were settling in? Just as they had begun to trust? I'll look into this and get back to you, she managed to say, keeping her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Alexander nodded, handing her a business card embossed with the logo of Blackwood Equestrian. I'll expect to hear from you soon, Ms. Walker. Very soon. Sarah stood in the driveway long after Alexander Blackwood's Range Rover had disappeared down the dirt road, his business card clutched in her hand. The morning sunshine suddenly felt less warm, the peaceful sounds of the ranch less comforting. She glanced toward the old barn where Duchess, or Golden Empress, if Blackwood was to be believed, was nursing her miracle foal. Everything okay? Tom called, emerging from one of the paddocks with an empty feed bucket. His expression shifted to concern when he saw Sarah's face. What happened? Sarah handed him Blackwood's card. We have a problem. After explaining the situation to Tom, Sarah retreated to the office and pulled out Duchess's file. The documentation from animal control was straightforward. Duchess had been seized, along with 17 other horses and various other animals, from a property owned by a man named Ray Simmons. The horses had been distributed to several rescues in the region, with Duchess coming to Willow Creek due to her age and special needs. Nowhere in the paperwork was there any mention of Duchess being stolen property or of her registered name being Golden Empress. As far as animal control had been concerned, she was simply an older Palomino mare in poor condition, one of many neglected animals found on Simmons' property. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed the number for animal control. After navigating an automated system and being placed on hold twice, she finally reached Denise Carpenter, the officer who had handled Duchess's case. Blackwood Equestrian," Denise repeated after Sarah explained the situation. "The name doesn't ring a bell, but that doesn't mean much. We didn't investigate the origins of all the animals. We were focused on documenting the neglect and building a case against Simmons. So it's possible that Duchess, Golden Empress, really was stolen?" "It's possible," Denise admitted. "Simmons couldn't account for where most of the animals came from. He claimed some were given to him, others he bought cheap at auctions. He wasn't exactly forthcoming." "What happens if Blackwood can prove ownership?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer. "Legally? If he can prove the horse was stolen and that he's the rightful owner, he has a claim to her. And technically, to any offspring born after the theft as well." Sarah's heart sank. What about the fact that she was neglected? Surely that affects his rights. If he can prove that Simmons stole her rather than Blackwood selling or giving her to him, then Blackwood wouldn't be legally responsible for the neglect. Denise's voice softened. "Look, I know this is tough. These cases get complicated. My advice would be to consult with a lawyer who specializes in equine law. And in the meantime, verify Blackwood's claims independently. Don't just take his paperwork at face value." After thanking Denise, Sarah sat staring at the phone for several minutes. Then she picked it up again and dialed Mike's number. "I was just about to call you," he said when he answered. "Wanted to check how Duchess and Hope are doing." "They're fine," Sarah said, unable to keep the strain from her voice. "But we've got a situation, Mike." By the time she finished explaining, Mike was silent on the other end of the line. "Mike, you still there?" "I'm here," he said finally. "Just thinking. This Blackwood character, I've heard the name. He runs a high-end breeding operation over in Wellington County. Specializes in show horses, dressage mostly. Has a reputation for producing champions." "And what kind of reputation does he have as a person?" Mike hesitated. "Mixed. Some say he's brilliant with horses. Others say he's ruthless, will do anything to win, to maintain his reputation for excellence. Would he neglect a horse, or sell one to someone who would? Hard to say. His public image is all about exceptional horse care, state-of-the-art facilities. But behind closed doors? I don't know, Sarah." Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. "What should I do, Mike?" "First, check his story. Contact the breed registry, see if there really is a Golden Empress registered to Blackwood Equestrian. Get a description, maybe a photo if they have one. See if she matches Duchess. And if she does, then you need legal advice before Blackwood comes back. I know a lawyer in Eagle Creek who sometimes handles equine cases. I can give her a call if you want." "Please," Sarah said, relieved to have at least the outline of a plan. "And Mike, don't mention this to the volunteers yet. I don't want to worry them until we know more." After ending the call, Sarah decided to check on Duchess and Hope before making any more phone calls. She needed to see them, to remind herself who she was fighting for. In the old barn, she found Lily sitting on a hay bale, sketching the mare and foal as they dozed in the afternoon sunlight. Duchess was standing protectively over Hope, who had collapsed in an adorable heap of spindly legs, her tiny body rising and falling with each breath. "They're doing great," Lily whispered as Sarah approached. "Hope tried to run a little while ago. It was the cutest thing. All wobbly, like a wind-up toy about to tip over." Sarah smiled despite her worries. "Duchess is letting you stay close." "As long as I don't make any sudden moves," Lily confirmed. She's still cautious, but not aggressive anymore. "I think she's figuring out we're the good guys." If only it were that simple, Sarah thought. She watched the pair for a few minutes, struck by the peaceful tableau they created. Hope's coat was drying to a gleaming golden color, almost identical to her mother's. Her mane and tail would likely be cream-colored as well, creating the classic Palomino look that was so sought after in show rings. Royal decree, Alexander had said, his champion stallion. If that was true, Hope might indeed be extremely valuable in the right circles. A pedigreed foal from championship bloodlines could fetch tens of thousands of dollars. The thought made Sarah's stomach turn. To her, Hope wasn't a commodity or an investment. She was a miracle, a symbol of resilience and hope in the face of adversity. And Duchess wasn't a broodmare, but a sentient being who had suffered and survived, who deserved peace and security in her remaining years. "I won't let him take you," Sarah whispered, so softly that Lily didn't hear her. "I promise." Back in the office, Sarah began her research. A quick internet search for Blackwood Equestrian yielded an impressive website showcasing a gleaming facility with manicured grounds, state-of-the-art stables, and photos of magnificent horses with championship ribbons. Alexander Blackwood featured prominently, accepting trophies, shaking hands with what appeared to be important people in expensive clothes, standing proudly beside his equine champions. She found Royal Decree easily enough, a magnificent bay stallion with a list of championships that scrolled down the page. His stud fee was listed as available upon application, which Sarah knew meant if you have to ask, you can't afford it. There was no mention of Golden Empress on the website, but that wasn't unusual. Breeding operations often had more horses than they featured on their public pages. Next, Sarah called the American Quarter Horse Association, where the receptionist informed her that owner information was private but confirmed that a mare named Golden Empress was indeed registered to Blackwood Equestrian. When Sarah described Duchess, including her age, coloration, and the small white star on her forehead, the receptionist hesitated. "That does sound like the Golden Empress in our registry," she admitted, "but I can't officially confirm that without proper authorization." Sarah thanked her and hung up, her heart heavy. It seemed Alexander Blackwood's claim might be legitimate after all, which meant Duchess and Hope could be taken away at any moment, back to a world of performance pressure and breeding expectations, where their value was measured in ribbons and offspring rather than in the simple joy of their existence. "I won't let that happen," Sarah said aloud to the empty office. "Somehow, I won't let that happen." The next morning, Sarah sat in the modest office of Patricia Reeves, the lawyer Mike had recommended. Unlike Alexander Blackwood's polished exterior, Patricia was all practical efficiency, sensible shoes, no-nonsense haircut, and a direct gaze that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries when there was work to be done. "So let me make sure I understand," Patricia said, reviewing the notes she'd taken during Sarah's explanation. "This mare was seized by animal control from a neglect situation. You've had her for 6 months. Yesterday, this Alexander Blackwood shows up claiming she's actually his valuable broodmare that was stolen, and now she's given birth to a foal that could be worth a significant amount if it's truly sired by his champion stallion." Sarah nodded. "That's the situation. I've verified that there is a Golden Empress registered to Blackwood Equestrian and the description matches Duchess." "And he's coming back today with his documentation?" "Yes, sometime this afternoon." Patricia leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her legal pad. "I won't sugarcoat this, Sarah. If Blackwood can prove ownership, and especially if he can prove the horse was stolen rather than sold or given away, the law will likely be on his side." Sarah's heart sank. Even though she was neglected, even though he apparently didn't bother to look for her until a foal was involved. The neglect occurred while she was in Simmons' possession, not Blackwood's. As for not looking for her, Patricia shrugged. He could claim he did look but wasn't able to locate her until now. It would be hard to disprove. "So what can I do?" Sarah asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "I can't just hand them over to him. You should see Duchess. She's just starting to trust humans again, and Hope is thriving with her. Taking them now would be traumatic for both of them. Patricia studied Sarah's face. How attached are you to keeping them? Very, Sarah admitted. But it's not just personal. I genuinely believe they're better off at the rescue than returning to a breeding program, especially after what Duchess has been through. Then we need a strategy. Patricia began writing again. Here's what I'm thinking. First, we don't concede anything until we've thoroughly examined Blackwood's documentation. Even if he proves ownership, we can potentially negotiate. Negotiate? What do you mean? Blackwood wants the horses, but what he really wants is the value they represent. The mare for her breeding potential, the foal for its bloodlines. We might be able to offer an alternative that satisfies his financial interests while allowing the horses to remain with you. Sarah frowned. I don't have money to buy them from him. No, but there are other possibilities. For instance, you could propose a breeding lease agreement for the foal when she matures. He gets breeding rights, but she stays with you. Or you could offer him positive publicity, which could be valuable to his business. You think he'd care about that? Patricia's expression turned shrewd. I looked up Blackwood Equestrian before you arrived. Alexander Blackwood is currently bidding for a major contract to supply horses to the National Equestrian Team. His reputation matters right now, perhaps more than one mare and foal. For the first time since Blackwood's arrival, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. So we could offer to publicly credit him with the donation of Duchess and Hope to our rescue? Exactly. Frame it as a compassionate gesture that aligns with his brand of equine excellence and care. It could actually enhance his reputation more than simply reclaiming them would. Sarah considered this. It might work, and if it doesn't, then we fight, Patricia said simply. We raise questions about how the mare ended up in Simmons's possession. We highlight the trauma of separating her from her foal. We make it as uncomfortable as possible for him to pursue this. Blackwood has resources, but that doesn't mean he wants a protracted legal battle or negative publicity. By the time Sarah left Patricia's office, they had developed a plan for Blackwood's visit. Patricia would accompany Sarah back to the ranch to review his documentation and present their proposal if his claim proved valid. As Sarah drove back to Willow Creek, her mind was filled with possible scenarios. What if Blackwood rejected their offer? What if he became angry? What if he arrived with a trailer and demanded to take Duchess and Hope immediately? She was so distracted by these thoughts that she almost missed the sudden influx of cars parked along the ranch's driveway. At least a dozen vehicles lined the normally empty dirt road leading to the main house. What on earth? Sarah murmured, pulling up behind a minivan with a local license plate. As she approached the house, she spotted Zach standing on the porch, enthusiastically talking to a middle-aged couple while gesturing toward the old barn. Sarah, he called when he saw her. You're back. It's been crazy here. People started showing up right after you left. What people? What's going on? Zach's face broke into a wide grin. The post about Hope went viral. The local news picked it up, and then some big animal sites shared it, and now everyone wants to see the miracle foal. We've had over 30 visitors already, and people have been making donations too. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Donations? Almost $2,000 so far, Tom said, emerging from the house with a coffee can that apparently served as an impromptu donation box, plus promises of hay deliveries, feed supplements, and 3 people signed up to become monthly supporters. Sarah felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief at the financial lifeline, concern about the unexpected visitors, and anxiety about how Duchess would handle the attention. How is Duchess coping with all these strangers? She asked. That's the most amazing part, Lily said, joining them. She's been incredible. As long as people stay behind the stall guard, she's totally calm. Hope is practically showing off for visitors, prancing around, coming up to the edge of the stall. It's like they both know these people are here to help them. Sarah hurried to the barn, where a small group of visitors stood watching Duchess and Hope with expressions of wonder. Hope was indeed putting on a show, awkwardly gamboling around her mother on legs that seemed more coordinated than they had been just that morning. Duchess stood alert, but relaxed, her eyes watchful, but not fearful, as strangers admired her baby. The mare looked up as Sarah approached, and to Sarah's amazement, Duchess nickered softly in greeting, the first time she had voluntarily acknowledged Sarah's presence. "She recognizes you as her person now," an elderly man said, smiling at Sarah. "My wife and I bred horses for 40 years before retiring. You can always tell when a horse has decided to trust someone." Sarah blinked back unexpected tears as she slipped into the stall. Duchess allowed her to approach, even lowering her head for Sarah to stroke her neck. Hope, spotting her favorite human, abandoned her audience and wobbled over to investigate Sarah's pockets for treats. "I'll fight for you," Sarah whispered to them both. "Whatever it takes." But as she looked up, her moment of connection was shattered by the sight of a familiar black Range Rover pulling into the ranch yard. Alexander Blackwood had arrived, and judging by the woman in a suit who emerged from the passenger side, he had brought his own lawyer. The battle for Duchess and Hope was about to begin. Sarah quickly stepped out of the stall, her heart racing. "Patricia," she said into her phone, "Blackwood is here early. Can you get here as soon as possible?" "I'm 15 minutes away," Patricia replied. "Stall him if you can." Sarah took a deep breath and walked out to meet Alexander Blackwood and his lawyer. Up close, the woman beside him looked even more intimidating. Sleek hair pulled into a tight bun, designer suit that probably cost more than all of Sarah's possessions combined, and an expression that suggested she ate small rescue operations for breakfast. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah said, extending her hand with a confidence she didn't feel. "I wasn't expecting you until later. Ms. Walker." His handshake was firm, impersonal. "I prefer to be punctual in business matters. This is my attorney, Victoria Hargrove." The lawyer nodded curtly but didn't offer her hand. "I understand you've been housing my client's valuable property," she said, her tone implying Sarah had somehow done something underhanded. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral. "My attorney is on her way. I'd prefer to wait until she arrives before we discuss anything." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched. "You've retained counsel? That seems unnecessarily adversarial for a straightforward property return." Sarah bit back a sharp retort about horses not being property and simply said, "I believe it's in everyone's best interest to handle this properly." Alexander glanced past Sarah toward the barn, where visitors were still gathered. "You seem to have quite an audience today. I wasn't aware this was a petting zoo." "People are interested in Hope's story," Sarah said. "It's brought a lot of positive attention to the rescue." "Hope?" Alexander repeated, his tone suggesting the name amused him. "Is that what you're calling my filly?" Before Sarah could respond, a woman from the group of visitors approached, smiling broadly. "Are you the owner of the rescue? We just wanted to say what wonderful work you're doing here. That little foal is absolutely precious, and her mother is such a beautiful mare. The way you've helped them is inspiring." Alexander's expression flickered with something unreadable as the woman continued, unaware of the tension she'd walked into. "We've already made a donation, but we'd like to sponsor one of your horses monthly. Our daughter rides, and we think it would be a wonderful lesson for her to help support a rescue animal." Sarah managed to smile. "Thank you so much. That's incredibly generous. Would you mind speaking with Tom over there? He can get your information." As the woman walked away, Sarah noticed that Alexander was watching the interaction with calculated interest. The visitors gathering around Duchess and Hope had inadvertently created an audience for whatever was about to unfold, a fact that might work in her favor. Perhaps we could wait in the house until my attorney arrives, Sarah suggested, gesturing toward the modest farmhouse. It would be more comfortable. Victoria looked like she was about to object, but Alexander nodded. That would be fine, though I would like to see Golden Empress and her foal before we leave today. In the house, Sarah offered coffee, which Alexander accepted and Victoria declined. The three sat in uncomfortable silence in the small living room, the ticking of the old mantel clock seeming unnaturally loud. Finally, a car door slammed outside, and moments later Patricia Reeves entered, looking unruffled despite her hurried arrival. After brief introductions, they got down to business. I've brought all the necessary documentation to establish my ownership of Golden Empress, Alexander said, opening a leather portfolio. Registration papers, veterinary records dating back 10 years, and the police report I filed when she was stolen. He spread the documents on the coffee table. Sarah leaned forward, examining them with Patricia. The papers appeared legitimate. Certificates with official seals, veterinary records on professional letterhead, photographs of a younger Duchess at what appeared to be horse shows with Blackwood Equestrian's name prominently displayed. As you can see, Victoria added, there's no question that Golden Empress belongs to Blackwood Equestrian, and by extension so does her foal. Patricia reviewed the documents carefully. The registration and show records appear to be in order, she conceded. I'm interested in the circumstances of her disappearance, though. According to your police report, she went missing 18 months ago. Alexander nodded. She was taken from our property, along with 2 other valuable horses. We recovered one almost immediately, but Golden Empress and a gelding remained missing. And in all that time, you never located her at Mr. Simmons' property? Sarah asked. It was hardly a secret that he had horses. Animal control had been called multiple times. A flicker of discomfort crossed Alexander's face. We followed every lead. Unfortunately, Simmons' property was outside the search radius we focused on initially. By the time we expanded our search, she had already been removed by animal control. Patricia tapped the police report. There's no mention here of you contacting animal control or local rescues after the seizure of animals from Simmons' property. That was 6 months ago. Victoria straightened. My client is not on trial here, Ms. Reeves. The fact remains that Golden Empress is Mr. Blackwood's legal property, and he has the right to reclaim her and her foal. No one is disputing the legal ownership, Patricia replied smoothly, but we do believe there are considerations beyond the strictly legal that should be discussed. Sarah took her cue. Mr. Blackwood, when Duchess, Golden Empress, arrived here, she was severely malnourished, her hooves were neglected, and she was so traumatized she wouldn't let anyone near her. It's taken months of patient care to bring her back to health physically and to help her trust humans again. Which is why I'm prepared to make a donation to your rescue in appreciation of your care, Alexander replied. But she belongs at Blackwood Equestrian, as does her foal. That's very generous, Sarah said carefully, but I'm concerned about the trauma of separation. Duchess has only just begun to feel safe here, and Hope is barely a day old. Golden Empress will receive the finest care at our facility, Alexander said, a hint of impatience entering his voice. She'll have a spacious stall, premium feed, regular veterinary care, luxuries I'm sure your rescue struggles to provide. The subtle dig stung, but Sarah refused to be baited. We believe there might be a solution that benefits everyone involved, she said, nodding to Patricia. Mr. Blackwood, Patricia began. Given the circumstances, we'd like to propose an arrangement. The mare and foal would remain here at Willow Creek, but you would retain breeding rights to the filly when she matures. Additionally, Willow Creek would publicly acknowledge Blackwood Equestrian's generous donation of these horses to the rescue, highlighting your commitment to equine welfare. Alexander's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Furthermore, Patricia continued. Willow Creek would partner with Blackwood Equestrian for an annual fundraising event, connecting your brand with community goodwill and ethical horse care, attributes that I understand are particularly valuable given your current bid for the national team contract. Victoria's head snapped toward Alexander, a silent communication passing between them. So Patricia's intelligence about the contract was accurate. An interesting proposal, Alexander said finally, but one that fails to address the fundamental issue. Golden Empress and her foal are valuable breeding stock. Their place is at Blackwood Equestrian. Before anyone could respond, the front door burst open and Zach appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. Sarah, you need to come quick. Something's wrong with Duchess. Sarah bolted from her chair, her heart pounding. What's happened? She collapsed, Zach said, his voice cracking. She was fine 1 minute, then she just went down. Mike's on his way, but... Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She raced out the door, dimly aware of footsteps following behind her. The short distance to the barn felt endless as her mind cycled through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Complications from the birth, colic, internal bleeding. In older mares who'd been through trauma, the list of what could go wrong was dauntingly long. When she burst into the barn, the crowd of visitors had been ushered outside by Tom, who stood guard at the entrance. Only Lily remained, kneeling beside Duchess in the straw. The mare lay on her side, her breathing labored, her eyes wide with distress. Hope stood nearby, confused and anxious, occasionally nudging her mother with her muzzle. When did this start? Sarah asked, dropping to her knees beside Duchess. About 10 minutes ago, Lily said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She seemed restless, kept shifting her weight. Then she started to sweat and paw at the ground. Classic colic signs. I was about to call you when she went down. Sarah placed her hand on Duchess's neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath her fingers. The mare's coat was damp with sweat, her muscles trembling with pain. Has she tried to roll? Lily shook her head. Not yet, but she keeps looking at her flank. A shadow fell across them as Alexander Blackwood entered the stall, his expression unreadable. He knelt beside Duchess, his movements confident and practiced as he ran his hands along her abdomen. How long since she foaled? He asked, his tone clipped and professional. Less than 48 hours, Sarah replied, surprised by his immediate shift into action. Alexander nodded, continuing his examination. Could be retained placenta causing infection or post-foaling colic. Has she been passing manure normally? Yes. Everything seemed fine until now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. I'm calling my veterinarian. He's one of the best equine specialists in the region. Sarah stared at him, momentarily speechless at this unexpected side of the polished businessman. Before she could respond, Mike hurried into the barn, medical bag in hand. What do we have? He asked, all business as he joined them in the stall. Suspected colic, Sarah said. Started suddenly, no rolling yet. Mike began his examination as Alexander spoke quietly into his phone, giving precise details about Duchess's symptoms. Hope whinnied nervously, pressing against Lily, who had moved to comfort the frightened foal. Her gut sounds are decreased, Mike said after listening with his stethoscope. Temperature's elevated, 102.8. Could be impaction colic, but I'm worried about infection given the recent foaling. Alexander ended his call. Dr. Bennett is 20 minutes out. He's bringing IV antibiotics and pain management. Mike glanced at him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Jim Bennett? From Wellington Equine Hospital? Yes, you know him? By reputation. One of the best. Alexander turned to Sarah. We should get her up if possible. Walking can help with colic, and lying down too long after foaling isn't good. Sarah nodded, setting aside her questions about this new, competent Blackwood for later. Together they positioned themselves around Duchess, encouraging her to rise. The mare struggled, her legs trembling with the effort, but finally managed to stand, swaying slightly. "Good girl," Sarah murmured, stroking her neck. "That's it." For the next 15 minutes they walked Duchess slowly around the barn, Hope trailing anxiously behind them with Lily. The mare's steps were unsteady, her head hanging low, but she kept moving. Sarah noticed how Alexander maintained a reassuring contact with Duchess throughout, his hand steady on her shoulder, his voice low and calm as he spoke to her. "You know her well," Sarah observed as they completed another circuit. Alexander's eyes remained on Duchess. "I raised her from a foal. Her dam was my first real investment when I started Blackwood Equestrian." There was something in his voice, a softness that had been entirely absent in the house, that made Sarah look at him more closely. "You care about her?" "Of course I care about her," he replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. "All my horses receive exceptional care." "That's not what I meant," Sarah said quietly. "You care about her, Duchess, Golden Empress, not just as valuable property, but as an individual," he finished, surprising her. "Yes, I know every horse in my stable by their quirks, their preferences, their personalities. Empress always liked having her ears rubbed. She'd stand for hours if you'd let her." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by this glimpse of humanity. "She still does. It was one of the first ways I connected with her." Before Alexander could respond, the sound of a vehicle pulling up outside drew their attention. Moments later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair entered the barn, carrying a medical case. "Jim," Alexander said with evident relief. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course," Dr. Bennett replied, his eyes already assessing Duchess. "Let's have a look at our patient." The next half hour passed in a blur of medical terminology and focused activity. Dr. Bennett confirmed Mike's suspicion of infection, likely from a small piece of retained placenta. He administered antibiotics, pain medication, and fluids via IV while explaining each step to both Sarah and Alexander, who stood side by side, their earlier animosity temporarily forgotten in their shared concern for Duchess. "She should respond to the antibiotics fairly quickly," Dr. Bennett said after completing the treatment. "The pain medication will make her more comfortable in the meantime. I'd like to stay for a couple of hours to monitor her response." "Of course," Sarah agreed, "whatever she needs." As if understanding the conversation was about her, Duchess turned her head toward Sarah, her eyes clearer now that the medication was taking effect. She nickered softly, then extended her neck to nuzzle Alexander's shoulder, a gesture of recognition that seemed to catch him by surprise. "She remembers you," Sarah said, watching as Alexander gently stroked the mare's muzzle. "Horses don't forget," he replied simply. They settled Duchess back in her stall, now cleared of visitors and quieted for her recovery. Hope, relieved to see her mother standing again, pressed close to the mare's side, seeking reassurance. Dr. Bennett remained nearby, checking vital signs periodically, while Mike prepared additional medications for the next phase of treatment. In the relative calm, Sarah became aware of Victoria standing at the stall entrance, her expression a mix of impatience and discomfort in the rustic surroundings. Patricia stood beside her, their earlier legal adversary roles momentarily suspended by the medical emergency. "Alexander," Victoria said, checking her watch. "We have the meeting with the National Team Committee at 4. We should leave soon if we're going to make it." Alexander frowned, looking from Victoria to Duchess and back again. Sarah could almost see the internal struggle playing across his face. The businessman with obligations versus the horseman concerned about an animal in distress. "You should go," Sarah said, surprising herself. "Dr. Bennett is here, and we'll update you on any changes. She's getting the care she needs." Alexander hesitated, then nodded. I'll have Jim stay until he's confident she's stable. He turned to Sarah, his expression more open than she'd seen it yet. Thank you for acting so quickly. Your response may have saved her life. She's special to me too, Sarah said simply. As Alexander turned to leave, Hope wobbled over to the stall door, regarding him with curious eyes. For a moment, man and foal studied each other, one calculating the value and potential, the other innocent of all such concerns. She has her mother's eyes, Alexander said softly, almost to himself. Then, with a final glance at Duchess, he followed Victoria out of the barn. Sarah spent the night in the barn, catching fragments of sleep on a cot Tom had set up beside Duchess's stall. Every hour she checked the mare's vital signs as Dr. Bennett had instructed before reluctantly leaving for another emergency. Duchess's condition had stabilized, her temperature dropping toward normal and her breathing becoming more regular as the antibiotics began to work. Throughout the night, Hope stayed close to her mother, occasionally nursing when Duchess had the strength to stand. By dawn, Sarah was exhausted, but relieved. The worst seemed to have passed. Duchess was on the mend, alert enough to nicker softly when Sarah approached with fresh water. You scared us, Sarah murmured, stroking the mare's neck. But you're a fighter, aren't you? Always have been. Mike arrived early, bringing breakfast sandwiches and coffee. After examining Duchess, he nodded with satisfaction. She's responding well to treatment. The infection is under control. She'll need to continue the antibiotics for at least a week, but I think we're past the danger point. Sarah sagged with relief. Thank goodness. You look terrible, by the way, Mike added with a half smile. When's the last time you slept in an actual bed? I'll sleep when I'm dead, Sarah replied, taking a grateful sip of the coffee. Or at least when I'm sure Duchess is completely out of danger. Mike was about to respond when the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Through the barn door, Sarah saw Alexander Blackwood's Range Rover pull up. Unlike yesterday's power suit, today he wore jeans, riding boots, and a casual jacket, attire more suited to a barn than a boardroom. I didn't expect to see him again so soon, Sarah murmured. Mike raised an eyebrow. No, I did. The way he was with Duchess yesterday, that wasn't just about protecting an investment. Alexander entered the barn alone, no lawyer in tow, his expression a mix of concern and something Sarah couldn't quite read. How is she? He asked without preamble. Much better, Sarah replied. The antibiotics are working. Her temperature's nearly normal and she's been eating a little. Relief flickered across Alexander's face as he approached the stall. Duchess raised her head at his voice, ears pricked forward in recognition. Hello, old friend, he said softly, extending his hand. The mare stretched her neck to nuzzle his palm, a gesture so natural it was clear they shared a history. Sarah watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Alexander's genuine affection for Duchess was undeniable, which complicated her feelings about the ownership dispute. If he truly cared about the mare's well-being, could she still justify fighting to keep her at Willow Creek? Mike, sensing the need for privacy, made a discreet exit. I'll check back this afternoon. Call if you need anything. Once he'd gone, an awkward silence fell. Alexander continued to stroke Duchess's neck, while Hope regarded him with curious eyes from behind her mother's legs. She's gaining confidence, Alexander observed, nodding toward the foal. Strong legs, good conformation. She's amazing, Sarah agreed. I've never seen a foal develop so quickly. Yesterday she could barely coordinate her legs. This morning she was practically prancing around the stall. Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually controlled features. Empress was the same way. Her first show was at 3 months, and she strutted around that ring like she owned it. Took first place. Duchess nudged his pocket, and Alexander laughed, pulling out an apple he'd apparently brought with him. Some things never change, he said, letting the mare take the treat from his palm. Always could smell an apple from a mile away. Sarah leaned against the stall door. You raised her from birth? Alexander nodded, his expression softening with memory. Her dam, Golden Legacy, was my first significant purchase when I started building my breeding program. I was 26, using every penny of my inheritance and a loan I could barely afford. Everyone said I was overpaying for an unproven broodmare, but she proved them wrong. She gave me 3 exceptional foals, including Empress. When Legacy died from colic at 10, it nearly broke me. But Empress, she was special from day one. The spitting image of her mother, with the same heart, the same fire. Sarah had never imagined Alexander Blackwood capable of such sentimentality. It didn't align with the calculating businessman who had arrived at her door demanding the return of his property. What happened? She asked. How did she end up with Simmons? Alexander's expression darkened. Simmons worked for me as a stable hand for 3 years. Quiet, competent, never any issues. Then he started showing up late, making mistakes. I later found out he'd developed a gambling problem, was drinking heavily. I gave him warnings, tried to help, but eventually had to let him go. He paused, jaw tightening at the memory. 2 weeks later, I came to the barn one morning and found 3 stalls empty. Security footage showed Simmons with a trailer in the middle of the night. We recovered 1 horse the next day. He'd sold it to a dealer I knew, who recognized the animal and called me. But Empress and a gelding named Midnight Commander had vanished. You filed a police report? Immediately. Distributed flyers, hired a private investigator, contacted every rescue and auction house within 500 miles, but they disappeared. The investigator thought Simmons might have transported them out of state. Sarah could hear the genuine pain in his voice. I'm sorry, she said softly. That must have been awful. Alexander nodded, continuing to stroke Duchess's neck. For months I kept expecting to find them, but as time passed, well, you start to lose hope. And then you saw our post about Hope's birth. A colleague sent it to me. I couldn't believe it when I saw her. Thinner, older, but unmistakably Empress. His eyes met Sarah's. I was angry when I came here yesterday. Angry that she'd been so close all this time, that she'd been through such neglect. Angry at myself for not finding her sooner. The honesty of his admission caught Sarah off guard. She'd expected corporate cold-bloodedness, not this raw emotion. She survived, Sarah said gently, and she had hope. Maybe that's what matters most now. Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching as Hope cautiously approached him, her curiosity overcoming her shyness. The foal stretched her delicate muzzle toward him, sniffing his hand with interest. Hello, little one, he murmured. Hope's ears flicked forward at his voice, her large eyes studying him intently. She's trying to decide if you're friend or foe, Sarah explained. She's cautious with new people. Smart girl, Alexander said, remaining still as Hope completed her investigation. Apparently satisfied, the foal nudged his hand, much as her mother had done, seeking treats. Alexander laughed softly. Definitely her mother's daughter. Sarah watched them, her mind racing. The legal reality remained unchanged. Alexander had a valid claim to both Duchess and Hope. But the man before her was not the cold, calculating figure she had first perceived him to be. He genuinely loved these horses. Mr. Blackwood, she began. Alexander, he corrected. I think we're past formalities after spending the night tending to a colicky mare together. Sarah smiled despite herself. Alexander then, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. He looked up, expression cautious but open. Go ahead. What happens to Duchess, Empress, if you take her back to Blackwood Equestrian? At her age, after everything she's been through. Alexander held her gaze. You're asking if I'd put her back into breeding? Sarah nodded, unwilling to soften the question. No, he said firmly. Her breeding days are over. She's earned her retirement. He glanced at Hope. This little one will be her legacy now. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders at Alexander's words. That's reassuring to hear, she said, choosing her words carefully. I've grown very attached to both of them, but I also understand your legal claim. Alexander nodded, his gaze shifting between the mare and foal. It's complicated, isn't it? When animals become more than property. He stroked Hope's soft muzzle, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking about our situation since yesterday. And? Sarah prompted when he fell silent. And I'm considering options that might work for everyone involved. He glanced around the barn, taking in the weathered beams, the patched roof, the stalls that had clearly been repaired multiple times. This place reminds me of where I started. Before the fancy facilities and championship ribbons, I had a small barn not unlike this one. Just me and 3 horses, scraping by on determination more than resources. Sarah was surprised by the admission. It's hard to imagine you struggling. Blackwood Equestrian didn't appear fully formed, he said with a wry smile. It took 15 years of 7-day weeks, missed holidays, and more financial gambles than I care to remember. Every success was built on the back of earlier failures. He looked at her directly, his expression serious. Your father's rescue. It means something to you, doesn't it? More than just a business. It's everything, Sarah admitted. Dad poured his heart and soul into this place. When he died, everyone expected me to sell the property and move on. But these horses, they were his legacy. I couldn't abandon them. Alexander nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. That's why you've been fighting so hard for Empress and her foal. It's not just about them, it's about what they represent to you. I suppose that's true, Sarah said, but it's also about what's best for them. Duchess has been through so much trauma. She's only just beginning to trust again. And Hope, this is the only home she's ever known. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Duchess's neck while he thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was decisive. I have a proposal, one that's different from what my lawyer suggested yesterday. Sarah tensed, unsure what to expect. I'm listening. I won't separate Empress and Hope, and I won't remove them from an environment where they're clearly thriving, he began. But I also can't simply walk away from horses that have been part of my breeding program, especially given the circumstances of their disappearance. Sarah nodded cautiously. That seems reasonable. So here's what I propose. The horses stay here at Willow Creek, but with formal recognition that they remain part of Blackwood Equestrian's breeding line. When Hope is mature, I retain breeding rights, but only through artificial insemination, so she never has to leave the rescue. Sarah considered this. It wasn't so different from Patricia's initial proposal, but Alexander's tone was different, less demanding, more collaborative. And Duchess retires here, as I said. She's earned her peace. He hesitated, then added, in return, I'd like visiting privileges. Not ownership visits, but I raised her from a foal. I'd like to remain part of her life if that's possible. There was a vulnerability in his request that Sarah hadn't expected. Of course, she said softly. She clearly remembers you, and that bond should be honored. Something in Alexander's expression eased at her words. Thank you. There's still the matter of the rescue's financial situation, Sarah said, deciding to be direct. We're struggling, as I'm sure you've noticed. The feed bill alone. I'm prepared to help with that as well, Alexander said. Not just a one-time donation, but ongoing support. These horses, all of them, deserve proper care and security. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his generosity. "Why would you do that?" "Multiple reasons," he admitted. "Some selfish, some perhaps less so. The publicity value of being associated with Hope's story is considerable, especially with the national team contract pending. But beyond that..." He looked around at the rescue, his expression thoughtful. "Places like this are rare and valuable. They give horses second chances when the commercial world has no use for them anymore. Even successful breeders like yourself need such places," Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "Especially successful breeders," Alexander replied with unexpected candor. "The reality of the horse business is that not every animal can be a champion or a profitable broodmare. Having ethical caring options for retirement or rehoming is essential for the industry's integrity." Sarah hadn't expected such a nuanced perspective from him. "So this would be a partnership of sorts?" "Exactly. Blackwood Equestrian becomes the primary sponsor of Willow Creek Rescue, providing financial support and professional resources. In return, we gain positive publicity and the satisfaction of supporting ethical horse welfare. And I get to remain connected to Empress and Hope without disrupting the home they found here." It sounded almost too good to be true. Sarah hesitated, looking for the catch. "And the legal ownership?" "On paper, they remain Blackwood property, which satisfies my insurance and business requirements. In practice, they stay here under your care, with mutual decision-making about their well-being." Sarah considered the proposal, watching as Hope pranced around her mother with the endless energy of the very young. The arrangement would solve the rescue's immediate financial crisis and provide long-term stability, something she hadn't dared hope for since her father's death. More importantly, it would keep Duchess and Hope where they belonged, while honoring Alexander's legitimate connection to them. "I think that could work," she said finally, "though I'd like my lawyer to review any formal agreement." "Of course," Alexander agreed. "I'll have Victoria draft something for Patricia's review." As if on cue, the sound of vehicles arriving broke the moment. Through the barn door, Sarah could see 2 news vans pulling into the ranch yard, followed by several cars. "What's happening?" Alexander asked, peering outside. Tom appeared at the barn entrance, looking both harried and excited. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this. The local news picked up Hope's story, and then some national morning show mentioned it, and now we've got reporters wanting interviews and about 30 more visitors waiting to see the miracle foal." Sarah groaned. "I'm not sure Duchess is up for that kind of attention right now. She's still recovering." Alexander considered the situation, then turned to Sarah with an unexpected smile. "What if we use this opportunity to announce our new partnership? The successful breeder and the dedicated rescuer, joining forces for the welfare of a special mare and her miracle foal. It's a compelling narrative." "You'd do that right now?" Sarah asked, surprised. "No time like the present," he replied with a confidence that reminded her of his business persona, though now it felt less intimidating. Besides, Empress always did love an audience. She was a bit of a diva in the show ring. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "That explains a lot about Hope, actually. She's been showing off for visitors all morning." Together, they stepped out of the barn to face the gathering crowd, united by their shared concern for the Palomino mare and her golden foal. As Alexander began speaking to the reporters with practiced ease, Sarah caught sight of Zach filming the whole thing on his phone, Tom grinning broadly beside him, and Lily leading small groups of visitors to view Hope from a respectful distance. For the first time since her father's death, Sarah felt the rescue had a future, one built on unexpected partnerships and the miracle of new life against all odds. She glanced back at Duchess, standing protectively near her foal, and whispered, "You knew what you were doing all along, didn't you, girl?" The mare nickered softly in response, her intelligent eyes seeming to hold secrets only she understood. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the fence of the largest paddock at Willow Creek, watching as Hope galloped across the autumn-tinged grass, her golden coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. At 6 months old, the filly had blossomed into a striking young horse, her mother's elegant conformation evident in her long legs and proud carriage. Unlike Duchess, who had taken months to trust the humans around her, Hope approached the world with confident curiosity, secure in the knowledge that she was safe and loved. "She's going to be something special," Alexander said, coming to stand beside Sarah. "Just look at that movement." In the months since their unexpected partnership began, Alexander had become a regular presence at the rescue, visiting at least once a week. His initial stiffness had gradually melted away, replaced by a genuine camaraderie with Sarah and the volunteers. Today, he wore his usual visiting attire, jeans, boots, and a casual jacket with the Blackwood equestrian logo discreetly embroidered on the chest. "Hard to believe she's the same wobbly little thing we found under Duchess that morning," Sarah remarked, smiling as Hope executed a perfect series of playful bucks before racing to catch up with her mother at the far end of the paddock. "Nature and nurture both at work," Alexander said. "She has the genetics, but she also has something many well-bred foals don't: complete freedom to just be a horse, to play, explore, develop at her own pace." Sarah nodded, knowing he was right. Under their agreement, Hope would never be pushed into early training for the show ring. She would mature naturally, her well-being always the priority over competitive ambitions. The rescue itself had undergone a remarkable transformation in the past 6 months. The partnership with Blackwood Equestrian had brought not only financial stability, but also professional resources that Sarah could never have accessed on her own. The old barn had been completely renovated with new roofing, improved ventilation, and modernized stalls. The paddock sported sturdy new fencing, and a covered arena was under construction for winter training and rehabilitation work. Most importantly, the rescue's financial future was secure. Alexander's sponsorship covered the basic operating costs, while the publicity from Hope's story had dramatically increased private donations and volunteer applications. What had once been a struggling operation on the verge of closure was now a thriving sanctuary, with a waiting list of people hoping to adopt its rehabilitated horses. "Did you see the new article in Equestrian Monthly?" Alexander asked, pulling out his phone. "They did a beautiful job with the feature." Sarah smiled as he showed her the glossy magazine spread titled "Miracle at Willow Creek: How an Unlikely Partnership is Changing Horse Rescue." The photos captured the essence of their work together: Duchess and Hope in their paddock, Sarah working with a recently rescued thoroughbred, Alexander consulting with Mike on a treatment plan for an elderly horse with arthritis. "It's still strange seeing myself in magazines," Sarah admitted. "Dad would have gotten such a kick out of all this attention." "He'd be proud of what you've accomplished," Alexander said, his tone sincere. "Not many people could have turned a near disaster into something this successful." Sarah thought back to the day of Duchess's illness, when everything had seemed to be falling apart. The desperate worry for the mare's health, the fear of losing her and Hope to Alexander's legal claim, the crushing weight of the rescue's financial problems, all had seemed insurmountable. Yet somehow, that crisis had become the catalyst for everything good that followed. "It wasn't just me," she said. "If you hadn't been willing to see beyond the legal issues, to recognize what was best for Duchess and Hope." Alexander shrugged, a gesture that would have seemed dismissive 6 months ago, but now Sarah recognized as his way of deflecting praise. "I made a business decision that happened to align with what was right for the horses." "We both know it was more than that," Sarah countered gently. "You could have taken them back to Blackwood, used your resources to ensure they received excellent care, but you recognized that what they needed most wasn't state-of-the-art facilities or expensive feed supplements. It was the sense of security they'd found here." Alexander didn't immediately respond. his gaze following Duchess as she grazed peacefully, looking healthier and more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen her. The mare's coat gleamed with vitality, and she moved with the grace of a horse half her age, the trauma of her neglect now little more than a fading memory. "I think we both learned something important through all this," he said finally, "about what truly matters when it comes to caring for these animals." Across the paddock, Duchess raised her head, ears pricking forward as she noticed Alexander. With a soft nicker, she trotted toward the fence, Hope bouncing along beside her. The mare's greeting was as warm for Alexander as it was for Sarah now, a far cry from the fearful, defensive animal who had once pinned her ears at any human who approached. "Hello, beautiful," Alexander murmured as Duchess stretched her neck over the fence to bump his shoulder affectionately. He produced an apple from his pocket, a ritual that had not changed since his first post-partnership visit. "Still remember all my secrets, don't you?" Sarah watched as Hope nudged impatiently at Alexander's other pocket, having learned that he always brought treats for her too. "Definitely her mother's daughter," she laughed as Alexander retrieved a second apple. "The perfect blend of her parents," he agreed. "Royal decrees athleticism with Empress's intelligence and heart." They stood in companionable silence, watching as mother and daughter returned to their grazing, occasionally breaking into short bursts of play. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the paddock, gilding the horses' coats with amber light. "I've been meaning to tell you," Alexander said after a while. "We got the national team contract." Sarah turned to him with a genuine smile. "Alexander, that's wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you." The committee specifically mentioned our partnership with Willow Creek as one of the deciding factors. They were impressed by our commitment to ethical horse welfare throughout an animal's entire life cycle, not just during their competitive years. "I'm glad it's working out for both of us," Sarah said. "For all of us," she amended, glancing at the horses. "It is," Alexander agreed. "Which is why I wanted to discuss expanding our partnership. There are other rescues that could benefit from this model, other horses like Empress who deserve a chance at a peaceful retirement after their working years." Sarah listened as he outlined his vision, a network of specialized retirement and rehabilitation facilities, each with its own focus but all operating under the same core philosophy of compassionate, individualized care. It was ambitious, but with Blackwood's resources and reputation combined with the practical experience of people like Sarah and Mike, it was also entirely achievable. As the sun began to set, casting the rescue in a golden glow, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, she had discovered a frightened mare protecting a newborn foal, a miracle born against all odds. That discovery had nearly cost her the rescue, had pushed her to fight for what she believed was right, and had ultimately opened the door to possibilities she could never have imagined. "I think we could do it," she said finally, watching as Hope rested her muzzle against her mother's neck in a gesture of pure trust and affection. "I think we could change a lot of lives." Just then, as if sensing she was the topic of conversation, Hope lifted her head and looked directly at Sarah and Alexander. The filly's ears pricked forward, her eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity about the world that awaited her, a world made better by the unlikely partnership her birth had inspired. In that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that the rescue's name had never been more fitting. Hope had indeed come to Willow Creek, in more ways than one.